The first time Beatrice Jenkins saw a man flinch at her handshake. She was 12 years old and already taller than her father. By the time she turned 18 in the spring of 1878, she stood 6 feet and 2 inches tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry a full water barrel on each side, and hands that could palm a man's head like an apple. In Vulture City, Arizona Territory, where the gold mines drew men hungry for fortune and the saloons drew them hungry for everything else, Beatrice had learned to make herself as invisible as a woman of her stature could manage. She worked at the general store her parents owned on Main Street, stocking shelves that other women needed ladders to reach, hauling crates that made grown men grunt with effort, and enduring the whispers that followed her like tumbleweeds in the desert wind. The miners called her Big B when they thought she could not hear, though their voices carried through the thin walls of the wooden buildings that lined the dusty street. The saloon girls, petite things with painted faces and elaborate curls, giggled behind their hands when she passed. Even the respectable women of the town, those who attended the small chapel every Sunday and organized socials in the community hall, spoke to her with a mixture of pity and relief, as though grateful that their own daughters had been spared such a fate. The autumn of 1879 brought changes to Vulture City that nobody could have predicted. The mine had hit a new vein of gold, richer than anything discovered in the 3 years since the town's founding, and with it came a fresh wave of prospectors, gamblers, and drifters. Among them was Grant Callahan, a cowboy from Texas, who rode into town on a Saturday afternoon with dust coating his hat and a string of 5 horses trailing behind him. Beatrice was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the store when she first saw him. He sat tall in his saddle, a lean man with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of sage after rain. Unlike most men who came to Vulture City with gold fever burning in their veins, Grant moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who had already decided what he wanted from life and was in no particular rush to get it. He dismounted in front of the saloon across the street, tied his horses to the rail with practiced efficiency, and disappeared through the swinging doors. Beatrice thought nothing of it. Cowboys came and went in Vulture City like the dust devils that spun through the streets on windy days. She returned to her sweeping, pushing the fine Arizona dirt off the boards and into the street where it belonged, trying not to think about the dance social scheduled for that evening at the community hall. Her mother had been pestering her about attending for weeks. Martha Jenkins harbored stubborn hopes that Beatrice might find a husband despite her size, though both of them knew the truth. Men did not want wives who could outwork them, outlift them, and look them square in the eye without tilting their chins up. They wanted delicate creatures who needed protecting, women who made them feel strong and capable. Beatrice made men feel inadequate just by existing. "You should go tonight," her mother said that afternoon as they restocked the shelves with canned goods fresh off the supply wagon from Phoenix. Sally Morrison said her cousin is coming in from Prescott. He is a school teacher, very respectable. Beatrice hefted a crate that would have required 2 normal women to carry. And did Sally mention to this school teacher that I could probably carry him across the threshold instead of the other way around? Beatrice Ann Jenkins, that is no way to talk. Martha's voice carried the weary tone of a woman who had fought this battle too many times to count. "You are a lovely young woman. Any man would be lucky to have you." "Lucky is not the word they use, Mama." Beatrice set the crate down with more force than necessary. "I heard what Bill Patterson said last week. He told his friend I was built like a draft horse, good for work but not much else." Martha's face flushed with anger. "Bill Patterson is a fool who will die alone in these hills. You pay him no mind." But Beatrice did pay him mind, just as she paid mind to every cruel comment, every shocked stare, every man who looked at her and saw only a curiosity instead of a woman. She had armored herself against it over the years, building walls around her heart until she convinced herself she did not care. Yet the armor had cracks, and sometimes the hurt seeped through despite her best efforts. She did not plan to attend the social. She fully intended to plead a headache and spend the evening in her room reading one of the dime novels she kept hidden under her bed. But fate had other plans, delivered in the form of her father's bad knee. "I need you to make a delivery," Thomas Jenkins said as the sun started its descent toward the western mountains. "The Copper Queen mine ordered supplies 3 weeks ago, and they have been patient enough. My knee is acting up something fierce, and your mother cannot manage the wagon alone." The Copper Queen sat 5 miles outside town, a smaller operation than the main Vulture mine but profitable enough to keep a crew of 15 men working steady. Beatrice had made the delivery run before. She hitched up the wagon, loaded the supplies with her usual efficiency, and set out as the afternoon heat began to soften into evening cool. The road to Copper Queen wound through rocky hills dotted with saguaro cacti and creosote bushes. Beatrice had traveled it enough times that she could have managed it blindfolded. She let her mind wander as the horses plodded along, thinking about nothing in particular and everything at once. The sky turned the color of a fresh bruise, purple and orange and pink all bleeding together, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening east. She was 2 miles from the mine when she heard the sound of a horse in distress. The animal's high-pitched whinny cut through the evening air, followed by a man's voice speaking low and steady. Beatrice pulled the wagon to a halt and listened. The sounds came from beyond a rise to her left, where the road curved around a cluster of boulders. Any sensible woman would have continued on to the mine. The Arizona Territory held dangers enough without going looking for trouble. But Beatrice had never been able to ignore an animal in need, and the horse sounded genuinely frightened. She secured the wagon brake, climbed down, and made her way toward the noise. What she found on the other side of the rise made her stop short. One of the horses she had seen that afternoon, part of the string belonging to the cowboy from Texas, stood trembling beside a palo verde tree. The animal had managed to get its leg caught in a narrow crevice between 2 rocks, and the more it struggled, the worse the situation became. The cowboy himself sat nearby on a flat boulder, his left arm hanging at an odd angle. He looked up when Beatrice appeared, and she saw pain tighten the corners of his eyes. "I apologize for the picture we make," he said, his voice strained but polite. "My horse spooked at her rattler about an hour ago, threw me clean off and ran herself into this mess. I managed to get the snake dispatched, but I fear I dislocated my shoulder in the process." Beatrice took in the situation with a practiced eye. The horse was scared but not injured beyond some scrapes. The cowboy, however, needed medical attention. "You need a doctor," she said. "I need my horse freed first." He tried to stand and went pale, sitting back down hard. "She will hurt herself worse if she keeps fighting." Beatrice did not waste time arguing. She approached the horse slowly, speaking in the same low, steady voice she used with the draft horses that pulled her father's delivery wagon. The mare rolled her eyes and pulled against the trapped leg, but Beatrice kept coming, kept talking until she was close enough to place a hand on the animal's neck. "Easy now," she murmured. "Let me help you." She examined the trapped leg, noting how the rocks had caught the horse just above the hoof. The animal had wedged herself in good and tight. Beatrice ran her hands along the mare's leg, checking for breaks or serious injury, and found nothing beyond some swelling and scrapes. The horse tried to pull away again, but Beatrice held firm. "I am going to lift her leg," she called to the cowboy. "Be ready to steady her if she spooks." "With what arm?" he asked, and despite the pain he must have been in, she heard a thread of dry humor in his voice. Beatrice ignored that. She positioned herself beside the horse, got a good grip on the trapped leg, and prepared to lift. The rocks were heavy, wedged together by years of settling, but Beatrice had been lifting heavy things her entire life. She took a deep breath, set her feet, and heaved. The rocks shifted. The horse felt it and tried to bolt, but Beatrice held the leg steady, muscles straining, while the animal worked out its own freedom. 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, and then the leg pulled free. The mare scrambled away, favoring the injured leg but mobile. Beatrice let the rocks drop back into place and straightened, breathing hard. When she turned, she found the cowboy staring at her with an expression she had never seen on a man's face before. Not disgust, not pity, not the careful blankness most men adopted when confronted with her size. He looked impressed. "That was remarkable," he said. Heat flooded Beatrice's cheeks. She was not accustomed to compliments from men, especially not from men who looked like they had stepped out of one of her dime novels, all lean angles and quiet strength even while injured. "Your shoulder," she said, deflecting. "I can get you back to town. I would be grateful." He stood with visible effort, cradling his left arm against his ribs. "Though I hate to impose on a lady already occupied with her own business. The delivery can wait." Beatrice caught the mare, who had calmed now that her leg was free, and led her back to where the wagon waited. The cowboy followed, moving carefully. Getting him into the wagon proved challenging. He could not use his left arm, and the pain made him unsteady on his feet. Beatrice solved the problem by simply lifting him, one arm under his knees and the other supporting his back, and setting him gently on the wagon seat. The movement jarred his shoulder and he went pale again, but he did not cry out. "You are strong," he said when he caught his breath. "Yes." Beatrice climbed up beside him and released the brake. "People like to remind me." Something in her tone must have conveyed more than she intended, because the cowboy went quiet. They rode in silence for a few minutes, the wagon swaying over the uneven road before he spoke again. "I am Grant Callahan. I just signed on at the Rockingham Ranch about 10 miles south of town. Beatrice Jenkins. My parents own the general store. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Jenkins, even under such circumstances." He paused. "That was the most impressive display of strength I have seen outside a logging camp in Oregon. You likely saved my horse from a broken leg, and you have my sincere gratitude." Beatrice did not know what to say to that. Men did not thank her for her strength. They mocked it, feared it, or pretended not to notice it. She kept her eyes on the road and said nothing. The doctor in Vulture City was a gruff man named Henderson, who had served as a field surgeon during the war between the states and claimed nothing could shock him anymore. He took one look at Grant's shoulder, made a sound of professional assessment, and gestured to his examination table. "This is going to hurt," Henderson said bluntly. "I need to manipulate the joint back into place. You got anyone who can hold you steady?" Grant looked at Beatrice. She had stayed, telling herself it was only to make sure he received proper care, though she could not quite explain why she felt responsible for this stranger. "Miss Jenkins." Henderson glanced at Beatrice, then at Grant's shoulder and nodded. "You are strong enough to manage it. Stand behind him, put your hands on his shoulders, and keep him from moving when I pull." Beatrice positioned herself as instructed. Her hands settled on Grant's shoulders, and even through his shirt she could feel the tension in his muscles, the way he braced himself for pain. Henderson counted to 3 and pulled. Grant made a choked sound and his whole body went rigid, but Beatrice held him steady. Something in his shoulder made a wet popping noise, and then Henderson was wrapping it with practiced efficiency. "Keep that arm in a sling for 2 weeks," the doctor ordered. "No heavy lifting, no rope work, no riding anything livelier than a rocking chair. Come back if you develop fever or if the pain gets worse instead of better." Grant nodded, his face still pale but relieved. "Thank you, doctor." Henderson waved this away and looked at Beatrice. "You are the Jenkins girl, right? Your father's knee acting up again?" "Yes, sir. I was making the delivery to Copper Queen when I found Mr. Callahan. Better finish that before it gets full dark. Some of those mine boys get tetchy when their supplies are late." Henderson moved to wash his hands in a basin. "Callahan, you got a place to stay tonight, the boarding house on 3rd Street. Make sure you get there safe. That shoulder is going to hurt worse once the shock wears off." Beatrice helped Grant down from the doctor's office, supporting his weight more than she suspected he wanted to admit. Night had fully fallen while they were inside, and the street lamps cast pools of yellow light along Main Street. Music and laughter spilled from the saloon, mixing with the sound of piano music from the community hall where the social had already begun. "I should get you to the boarding house," Beatrice said. "You should finish your delivery." Grant looked at her in the lamplight, and again she saw that expression that made her heart do strange things in her chest. "I have imposed on your kindness enough for one evening. The delivery can wait until morning. The mine is not going anywhere." She walked with him the 3 blocks to the boarding house, a respectable establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Harrington. The landlady took one look at Grant's sling and clucked her tongue. "I will bring you up some dinner and something for the pain," she announced. "You look like death warmed over, Mr. Callahan. You are too kind, madam." Grant turned to Beatrice. "And you, Miss Jenkins, have been kinder than I deserve. I owe you a debt." "You owe me nothing." Beatrice felt suddenly awkward, aware of how she towered over the landlady, of how her hands looked too big hanging at her sides. "I hope your shoulder heals well." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Miss Jenkins, might I call on you sometime?" "To properly express my gratitude once I am recovered," Beatrice's heart lurched. She waited for the punchline, for the cruel joke to reveal itself, but Grant's expression remained open and sincere. "You do not have to do that." "I am aware I do not have to. I would like to." "Why?" The question emerged harsher than she intended, but she needed to know. "You have thanked me already." Grant seemed to consider his answer carefully. "Because in my experience, people who do kind things for strangers without expecting anything in return are rare enough to be worth knowing better. Because you saved my horse and likely saved me from spending a night in the desert with a dislocated shoulder. And because I would enjoy the company of someone who does not seem particularly interested in impressing anybody." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to Beatrice in years. She found herself nodding before she fully considered the implications. "All right, all right." Grant smiled, and it transformed his whole face, softening the hard edges the sun and wind had carved into his features. "I will come by the store once the doctor says I am fit for polite society again." Beatrice left before she could do something foolish like smile back. She returned to her wagon, finished the delivery to Copper Queen by moonlight, and arrived home well past midnight. Her mother had waited up, worry creasing her forehead until Beatrice explained about the injured cowboy and the delayed delivery. "A cowboy wants to call on you." Martha's worry transformed instantly into cautious hope. "The one from Texas that Sally mentioned. She said he looked like a decent sort." "He was being polite, Mama. I helped him with his horse." Beatrice headed for the stairs, too tired to discuss her non-existent romantic prospects. It does not mean anything. But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of Vulture City settling into sleep. She replayed the evening in her mind. She thought about the way Grant had looked at her, about the sincerity in his voice when he asked to call on her. She thought about his words, too, about being worth knowing better. Nobody had ever suggested Beatrice might be worth knowing better. Grant appeared at the general store 4 days later, his arm still in a sling but his color improved. Beatrice was restocking the dry goods when the bell above the door chimed. She turned, saw him, and nearly dropped the bag of flour she held. "Good morning, Miss Jenkins." He removed his hat with his good hand. "I hope I am not interrupting your work." "No, I mean yes, but that is fine. That is what the store is for." Beatrice set the flour down before she could embarrass herself. "How is your shoulder?" "Healing well, according to Dr. Henderson. I am following his orders to the letter, which is driving my boss at the ranch to distraction. Turns out I am not much use as a cowboy when I cannot rope or ride." He smiled. "I came to see if you might have time to take a walk with me, unless you are too busy." Beatrice glanced around the store. Her father stood behind the counter, helping a miner with ammunition, and her mother had gone to the post office. "I could take a break. I would appreciate that." They walked down Main Street in the morning sunlight, past the assay office and the hotel and the small chapel with its whitewashed walls. Grant matched his pace to hers, not rushing, not lagging behind. He did not try to fill the silence with empty chatter, which Beatrice appreciated more than he could know. "Where did you learn to handle horses like that?" he asked as they reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to desert scrub and distant mountains. "My father used to breed them before he opened the store. I grew up around horses." "You have a gift for it. My mare has not stopped talking about you." At Beatrice's confused look, he grinned. "Horse humor. Sorry, occupational hazard." Beatrice found herself smiling despite her intention to remain guarded. "How did you end up in Arizona?" "Texas is a long way off. Family complications." Grant's expression sobered. "My father wanted me to take over the family ranch, but I have 3 older brothers who had that well in hand. I wanted to see more of the world than the same 100 acres I grew up on. We parted on terms that were not entirely friendly, but not hostile either. I have been working my way west for the past 2 years, picking up ranch work where I can find it." "Do you miss Texas?" "Sometimes. Mostly I miss my mother's cooking and my youngest sister, who is the only member of the family who did not think I was crazy for leaving." He looked at her curiously. "What about you? Born and raised in Vulture City." "Born in Missouri, raised here since I was 10. My parents came for the gold rush." Beatrice paused, then added, "I was always big, even as a child, but it mattered less back in Missouri. We lived on a farm and being strong was useful. Here it just makes me different. Different is not the same as bad. Tell that to the people who cross the street to avoid walking past me." Grant stopped walking. They had reached the small cemetery at the edge of town, where wooden crosses and a few proper headstones marked the resting places of those who had not survived the harsh desert. He turned to face her fully. "I am going to tell you something, and I need you to believe me because it is the truth. When I saw you lift those rocks off my horse's leg, I did not think about your size except to be grateful for it. When you lifted me into the wagon, I did not feel diminished or ashamed. I felt cared for. Do you understand the difference?" Beatrice's throat tightened. "People do not usually see it that way." "Then people are fools." Grant's intensity surprised her. "You are one of the most capable people I have met in 2 years of traveling. You are kind without being weak, strong without being cruel. If other people cannot see that, the fault lies with them, not with you. You do not know me well enough to say that. Then let me know you better." He took a step closer, and Beatrice realized with a start that when he stood this near, She only had perhaps 3 inches on him. Most men she had to look down at from a much greater height. Let me spend time with you, talk with you, learn who you are beyond the first impression. I think I will like what I find. Why? The question burst from her like water from a broken dam. Why would you want to? You could court any of the saloon girls or one of the respectable women from the chapel. Why waste your time on someone like me? Because I do not want someone like them. I want someone real. Grant's good hand came up, hesitated, then gently touched her arm. I want someone who does not pretend to be helpless to make me feel strong. I want someone who can stand on her own 2 feet and chooses to stand beside me anyway. I want you, Beatrice Jenkins, if you will have me. No one had ever spoken to Beatrice like this. No one had ever looked at her the way Grant looked at her now, as though she were something precious rather than something awkward and oversized. She felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. I do not know how to do this, she admitted. I have never courted anyone before. Neither have I, not really. We can figure it out together, Grant smiled. Start by saying yes to spending more time with me. We can work out the rest as we go. Beatrice took a shaky breath and nodded. Yes, 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 I would like to spend more time with you. Grant's smile could have lit up the whole desert. Then we have a deal, Miss Jenkins. They walked back to town slowly, talking about small things, comfortable things. Grant told her about the Rockingham Ranch, about the cattle operation and the handful of cowboys who worked there. Beatrice told him about the general store, about her parents' dreams of one day opening a second location in Phoenix, about the books she loved to read when business was slow. When they reached the store, Grant tipped his hat to her. May I call on you again tomorrow? I would like that. Beatrice floated through the rest of the day in a daze. She helped customers, restocked shelves, and balanced the accounts, but her mind kept drifting back to Grant's words. The way he had looked at her, the warmth in his voice when he asked to know her better. Her mother noticed, of course. Martha Jenkins had a talent for reading her daughter's moods. That cowboy came by, she said casually while they were closing up the store that evening. His name is Grant Callahan. Grant Callahan came by. I saw you walking together. He asked to court me. Beatrice waited for the other shoe to drop, for her mother to warn her about getting her hopes up or protecting her heart. Instead, Martha smiled. Good. It is about time someone saw you properly. Over the following weeks, Grant called on Beatrice every day his ranch duties allowed. Sometimes they walked through town. Sometimes they sat on the bench outside the general store and talked while the desert sunset painted the sky impossible colors. He told her about his childhood in Texas, about learning to rope and ride before he could properly raid, about the brother who had taught him to play poker and the sister who had taught him to dance. Beatrice found herself sharing things she had never told anyone. The loneliness of being different, the ache of watching other girls her age receive valentines and dance at socials while she stood against the wall. The secret dreams she harbored of one day being seen as something other than Big B. The curiosity. The woman who did not quite fit anywhere. You fit with me, Grant said one evening as they sat on the bench, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. You fit perfectly with me. His shoulder had healed enough that he was back to full duties at the ranch, and Beatrice could see the work in the new calluses on his hands, the deeper tan on his face. He looked happy, settled in a way he had not when he first arrived in Vulture City. Tell me about your ranch boss, Beatrice said. You have mentioned him but never by name. Sam McAllister. Good man, fair employer. He bought the Rockingham about 5 years ago and built it up from nothing, has about 200 head of cattle now and plans to expand. He hired me on to help with the horse breeding program. Grant paused. Actually, I have been meaning to talk to you about that. Sam is looking to buy some quality breeding stock, and I remembered you mentioning your father used to breed horses. Does he still have any contacts in that world? He might. I can ask him. I would appreciate it. Sam is willing to pay fair prices for good animals, and I think your father's expertise would be valuable. The introduction led to Thomas Jenkins visiting the Rockingham Ranch, which led to a business arrangement that benefited both parties. More importantly, it gave Grant a reason to visit the store even more frequently, ostensibly to discuss horse business but really to see Beatrice. The town noticed, of course. Vulture City was too small for anything to escape attention for long. The whispers followed Beatrice just as they always had, but now they carried a different tone. Confusion, mostly. People could not understand what Grant Callahan, who could have his pick of available women, saw in Big B Jenkins. Beatrice heard the gossip secondhand, filtered through her mother's protective outrage and her father's stoic dismissal. She tried not to let it bother her, but old wounds ran deep. One afternoon, when Grant arrived at the store to find her quieter than usual, he pressed until she told him what was wrong. "People are talking," she said simply. "They cannot figure out why you are courting me. Let them talk. It does not bother you what they say." Grant leaned against the counter, his expression serious. "What bothers me is that you are letting their ignorance hurt you. What bothers me is that you still do not see yourself the way I see you. And how do you see me? Beautiful, capable, kind, funny, though you try to hide it. Stronger than anyone I have ever met, and I am not just talking about physical strength." He reached across the counter and took her hand. "I see someone I want to build a life with if she will have me." Beatrice's heart stuttered. "Grant, we have only been courting for 6 weeks. I know. I am not proposing right this second, though I am not ruling it out for the near future." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I am just telling you what I see when I look at you. I see my future, Beatrice. I see a partner, a friend, the person I want beside me for whatever comes next. People will always talk. Let them. I do not care about people. I care about you." The sincerity in his voice undid something in Beatrice's chest, some knot of fear and self-protection she had carried for so long she had forgotten it was there. She turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together, and allowed herself to believe him. Autumn deepened into winter, which in Arizona meant cooler temperatures but little else. The mine continued to produce gold, the town continued to grow, and Grant continued to court Beatrice with a steady determination that slowly wore down her defenses. He brought her small gifts, nothing expensive but always thoughtful. A book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. A hair ribbon in a color that matched her eyes. Once, a perfect quartz crystal he had found while mending fence line, because he knew she collected interesting rocks. For Christmas, Beatrice gave him a new pair of leather gloves she had sewn herself, working on them late at night when everyone else was asleep. Grant gave her a necklace with a small silver pendant shaped like a horse, and when he fastened it around her neck, his fingers lingered on her skin in a way that made her shiver. "I love you," he said quietly, and Beatrice's breath caught. They stood in the small parlor of her parents' house, the Christmas tree glowing with candles in the corner, and Grant looked at her with such open honesty that she could not doubt him. He loved her. This man, who could have had anyone, loved her. "I love you too," she whispered. And when he kissed her for the first time, gentle and sweet and reverent, Beatrice finally understood what all those dime novels had been trying to describe. Grant proposed on Valentine's Day, 1880, in front of half the town at the social Beatrice had finally agreed to attend. He got down on one knee in the middle of the community hall, pulled a ring from his pocket, and asked her to marry him in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. The hall went silent. Beatrice felt every eye on her, felt the weight of the town's judgment and expectation, but when she looked at Grant, all of that fell away. She saw only him, only the man who had looked past her size to see her heart, who had taught her that different was not the same as less. "Yes," she said, and the hall erupted in applause. They were married in April when the desert bloomed with wildflowers and the heat had not yet become oppressive. Beatrice wore a dress her mother had made, altered 3 times to get the fit right because no ready-made dress would accommodate her frame. Grant wore his best suit and looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. The ceremony took place in the small chapel, with most of Vulture City in attendance. Even the people who had mocked Beatrice, who had made cruel comments about her size, showed up and smiled and acted as though they had always supported the match. Beatrice did not care. She had Grant's hand in hers, his ring on her finger and his love warming her from the inside out. The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and when Grant kissed her, Beatrice felt like she could fly. They walked down the aisle together to cheers and thrown rice, stepped out into the bright Arizona sunshine, and began their life together. They moved into a small house on the Rockingham Ranch, a 2-room structure that Grant had spent the previous month fixing up. He had built her a bookshelf for all her novels, installed a proper stove for cooking, and even constructed a small porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. It was not much, but it was theirs. The first night in their new home, Grant pulled Beatrice close and held her, and for the first time in her life she felt small. Not diminished, not reduced, but protected, cherished, safe in his arms in a way she had never imagined possible. "I am going to spend the rest of my life making you happy," Grant murmured against her hair. "That is a promise." Beatrice believed him. She had learned to believe in promises, in love, in the possibility that she could be wanted exactly as she was. Grant had taught her that, one day at a time, one kind word and gentle touch at a time, until the walls around her heart had crumbled entirely. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Beatrice continued to help at the general store several days a week, but she also threw herself into ranch work. She helped Grant with the horses, using her strength to gentle even the most stubborn animals. She worked alongside the other ranch hands during branding season and roundup, earning their respect through sheer capability. The other cowboys had been skeptical at first, uncertain how to treat the boss's new wife who stood taller than most of them and could outwork half the crew. But Grant made it clear that Beatrice was to be treated as an equal, and her competence did the rest. Within 6 months, the men were coming to her for advice on handling difficult horses, and she had earned a reputation as the best roper on the ranch. "You are a wonder," Sam McAllister told her one day, watching as she gentled a wild Mustang that had been giving everyone else trouble. "Grant is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Beatrice replied, and she meant it. She had never imagined being this happy. Every morning she woke up next to Grant. Every evening they sat on their porch and talked about their day. Every moment felt like a gift she had not known to ask for. He made her laugh with his dry humor, challenged her with his questions about the world, and loved her with a fierce constancy that never wavered. Sometimes, late at night when they lay tangled together in bed, Grant would run his hands over her body and marvel aloud at her strength, her beauty, everything about her that the rest of the world had taught her to hate. He worshipped her with his words and his touch until Beatrice learned to see herself through his eyes, and what she saw was not a woman too big, too strong, too different. She saw a woman who was exactly right. In the spring of 1881, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She was thrilled at the prospect of a child, of building a family with Grant, but she worried too. What if she passed her size on to a daughter? What if she condemned another girl to the same mockery and loneliness she had endured? Grant listened to her fears with his usual patience, then took her hands in his. If we have a daughter who grows tall and strong, we will teach her to be proud of it. We will raise her to know that her worth is not determined by other people's opinions. And if anyone tries to make her feel small, she will have parents who will stand up for her and a mother who can teach her how to stand up for herself. And if we have a son, then we will teach him to judge people by their character, not their appearance. We will raise him to be kind, strong in the ways that matter, and smart enough to recognize that different is just different. Grant smiled. Either way, our child will know they are loved, wanted, and valued. That is what matters. Beatrice's fears did not disappear entirely, but they eased. She trusted Grant, trusted the life they were building together, trusted that together they could face whatever came. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Beatrice continued working almost until her delivery date, much to the consternation of the ranch hands who worried she would go into labor while breaking a horse or mending fence. She finally agreed to lighter duties in her 8th month, more to ease Grant's worry than because she felt she needed to. Their son was born on a cool December morning, a healthy baby boy with Grant's eyes and a shock of dark hair. They named him Thomas Grant Callahan, after both his grandfathers, and Beatrice fell in love all over again watching Grant hold their tiny son with such gentle reverence. "He is perfect," Grant whispered, cradling Thomas against his chest. "You are amazing, Bea. You are absolutely amazing." Thomas grew quickly, hitting every milestone with enthusiasm. He learned to crawl, then walk, then run, always exploring, always curious. He had his father's easy smile and his mother's stubborn determination. By his 2nd birthday, it was clear he would be tall, but whether he would reach Beatrice's height remained to be seen. Life continued. The ranch prospered. Grant's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and Beatrice became known throughout the territory as someone who could handle any animal, no matter how wild or damaged. People came from as far as Prescott and Phoenix to buy horses from the Rocking M, knowing they would get quality stock and fair dealing. Beatrice's parents retired from the general store when Thomas turned 3, selling the business to a young couple from back east and building a small house on the edge of the Rocking M property. Thomas adored his grandparents, and they doted on him shamelessly, spoiling him with stories and treats whenever Beatrice was not looking. In the summer of 1885, Beatrice gave birth to their 2nd child, a daughter they named Margaret Rose. Where Thomas had been an easy baby, Margaret proved challenging from day one. She wanted to be held constantly, cried at the slightest provocation, and seemed to sleep only when it was least convenient for her parents. But she was also beautiful, with Grant's dark hair and Beatrice's strong features, and both parents fell helplessly in love with their tiny, demanding daughter. Thomas, now 4 years old, appointed himself her protector, hovering near her cradle and running to alert his parents at the first sign of distress. "We make good children," Grant said one evening, watching Thomas carefully show Margaret a smooth river stone he had found, as though the 2-month-old baby could appreciate its beauty. "I think we should keep doing this." Beatrice laughed. "Give me at least a year before we discuss adding to the family again. Margaret has convinced me that I need time to recover." "Fair enough." Grant pulled her close, and Beatrice leaned into his strength, feeling the solid warmth of him against her back. "I love our life, Bea. I love you. I love our children. I love waking up every day knowing I get to spend it with you. I love you too." Beatrice turned in his arms, looked up at the man who had changed everything. You taught me what love was supposed to feel like. You taught me that I was worth loving. You taught me what strength really means." Grant kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "Not just physical strength, though you have that in abundance. The strength to be vulnerable, to let someone in, to believe in something good even when the world has given you every reason not to. You taught me that, Beatrice Callahan." They stood together on their porch, watching the sun set over the desert they had made their home, and Beatrice thought about the girl she had been. The lonely, mocked young woman who had armored her heart against hurt, who had believed she would never be small enough, delicate enough, feminine enough to be loved. Grant had proven all of that wrong. He had seen past her size to her soul, had valued her strength instead of fearing it, had made her feel precious without making her feel weak. In his arms, she was exactly the right size. In his eyes, she was beautiful. In his heart, she had found her home. Thomas grew into a tall, lanky boy with his mother's gift for handling horses and his father's easy way with people. Margaret proved to be just as tall as her mother had predicted, shooting up like a weed and reaching 5 feet by her 8th birthday. Unlike Beatrice, though, Margaret wore her height with confidence, having been raised by parents who taught her that different was not the same as less. When Margaret came home from school crying because a boy had called her a beanpole, Beatrice held her daughter close and told her about her own childhood, about the mockery and the loneliness. Then she told her about Grant, about learning to see herself differently, about finding someone who loved all of her exactly as she was. "You are strong and tall and beautiful," Beatrice said firmly. "And someday you will find someone who sees that, who values it, who makes you feel like the most precious person in the world. Until then, you hold your head high and remember that their opinions say more about them than about you." Grant, listening from the doorway, smiled. Their daughter dried her tears, squared her shoulders, and went back to school the next day with renewed confidence. The boy who had teased her learned quickly that Margaret Callahan was not someone to trifle with, especially when her mother arrived at school to have a quiet but firm conversation with his parents. The years passed in a blur of roundups and brandings, birthdays and holidays, quiet evenings on the porch and busy days working the ranch. Beatrice's hair began to show threads of silver, and Grant's face gained new lines from years of sun and wind, but their love remained constant. They added to their family twice more. Another son, James, born when Margaret was 6, and finally a daughter named Sarah, who arrived when Beatrice was 35 and convinced them both that 4 children was the perfect number. The ranch continued to prosper. Grant's horse breeding program gained renown throughout the territory, and when Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, the Rocking M was recognized as one of the premier ranches in the new state. Thomas took over much of the day-to-day operation, having grown into a man as capable as his father and as strong as his mother. Margaret surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, using her height and commanding presence to maintain order in a classroom full of rambunctious children. She married at 25, choosing a quiet accountant named Peter who adored her and never once suggested she should be anything other than exactly who she was. James and Sarah both stayed on the ranch, James working alongside his brother and father, Sarah developing a talent for the business side of the operation that proved invaluable as the ranch expanded. Beatrice's parents passed within months of each other when Beatrice was 42, having lived long enough to see all their grandchildren grown and happy. The loss hurt, but Beatrice took comfort in knowing they had seen her find the happiness they had always hoped for her, that they had died knowing their daughter was loved and cherished. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Grant took Beatrice back to the spot where they had first walked together. to the little cemetery at the edge of what was no longer really the edge of town. Vulture City had grown over the years, spreading out into the desert, though it would never be more than a small town by anyone's measure. "You remember what I told you here?" Grant asked, holding her hand as they stood among the weathered headstones and desert flowers. "You told me I was capable and kind. You told me the fault was with other people, not with me. I told you I wanted to know you better, that I thought I would like what I found." Grant turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. The afternoon sun caught the silver in his hair, highlighted the deep lines that life had carved around his eyes. "I was right, B. I was so right. Knowing you, loving you, building this life with you has been the greatest privilege of my existence." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. After 30 years, he could still undo her with his words. "You changed my life, Grant Callahan. You taught me what it meant to be seen, really seen by someone who looked past what I was supposed to be and loved what I actually was. You were always worth loving. I just had the good sense to recognize it." He pulled her close, and Beatrice rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, horse and leather and the soap he used, and something uniquely Grant that she would recognize anywhere. They stood together as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink and orange. Two people who had found each other against the odds and built something beautiful. Beatrice thought about the frightened young woman she had been, certain she would never be loved, never be wanted, never be anything but too much in a world that preferred women to be less. Grant had taught her differently. He had shown her that being strong was not something to apologize for, that taking up space was not a crime, that she deserved love not despite who she was but because of it. He had made her feel small only in the best possible way, in the safety of his arms, in the shelter of his love, in moments when she could set down the armor she wore for the world and just be Beatrice, completely and utterly herself. Their children had children of their own. Thomas and his wife had 3 boys who showed every sign of being as horse crazy as their grandfather. Margaret's children, 2 girls and a boy, all inherited her height and her confidence. James married late but happily, and his twin daughters became the light of Grant's later years. Sarah remained unmarried by choice, focusing instead on expanding the ranch's reach and building a cattle operation that rivaled the horses in profitability. Grant and Beatrice became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family, hosting holidays and Sunday dinners, dispensing advice and love in equal measure. They were the couple the younger generation pointed to when they talked about what marriage should look like, the example of love that lasted, that weathered storms, that only grew stronger with time. When Grant turned 65, the ranch hands threw him a surprise birthday party. The whole town showed up, it seemed, filling the ranch yard with music and laughter and food. Beatrice stood beside her husband, watching him accept congratulations and well wishes, and marveled at the life they had built. 65 years old and you still make my heart race, she told him later that night, when the guests had gone home and they sat on their porch in the comfortable darkness. 65 years old and you still take my breath away, Grant replied. Every single day, B. You still take my breath away. They had their share of hardships over the years, droughts that tested the ranch's survival, illnesses that scared them both, arguments that sometimes left them sleeping on opposite sides of the bed. But they weathered it all together, learning that love was not just the easy moments but also the commitment to stay through the hard ones. Grant taught Beatrice to dance, privately, in their living room where no one could see her stumble through the steps. She taught him to read the poetry she loved, and they spent countless evenings reading aloud to each other. They taught each other patience, forgiveness, the art of compromise, and the importance of choosing each other every single day. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, Grant stood and raised his glass in a toast. "To my wife," he said, his voice still strong though his hair had gone completely white. "The strongest person I have ever known in every sense of the word. The kindest heart, the bravest soul, the love of my life. 40 years married, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Here is to 40 more if we are lucky." "To 40 more," the family echoed, and Beatrice cried happy tears while her grandchildren climbed into her lap and asked why grandmother was sad. "Not sad," she told them, kissing their foreheads. "Happy. Sometimes people cry when they are very, very happy." The years continued to pass as years do. Grant's joints grew stiff with arthritis, and Beatrice's strength, while still formidable, was not quite what it had been in her youth. They slowed down, took things easier, spent more time on their porch and less time working the ranch directly. But they never stopped loving each other. If anything, their love deepened with age, becoming something richer and more complex than the bright passion of their youth. It became the comfort of familiar presence, the security of knowing someone completely, the peace of being wholly known and wholly accepted. When Grant was 72, he had a fall from a horse that left him with a broken hip. The recovery was long and painful, and for the first time in his life, he needed help with basic tasks. Beatrice cared for him with infinite patience, helping him dress and bathe and walk, never once making him feel diminished or weak. "The roles have reversed," Grant joked one day as Beatrice helped him from bed to chair. "Now you are the one taking care of me." "We take care of each other," Beatrice corrected. "We always have." Grant recovered, though he never quite regained his former mobility. He walked with a cane and could no longer ride, but he remained sharp and engaged, offering advice to Thomas and James as they ran the ranch, playing with his great-grandchildren, sitting on the porch with Beatrice, and watching the desert sunsets they had admired for more than 4 decades. On a warm evening in May 1925, 45 years after they had married, Grant and Beatrice sat on their porch as they had countless times before. The sky burned orange and red, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. "You remember when I first saw you?" Grant asked. "You were sweeping the boardwalk in front of the store. I thought you looked strong and capable, and I remember thinking the town was lucky to have someone like you. I remember thinking you looked like you had stepped out of one of my dime novels," Beatrice admitted. "Too handsome to be real, too confident to be interested in me." "I was interested from the first moment. I just needed a dislocated shoulder and a trapped horse to give me an excuse to talk to you." Grant reached for her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "Best thing that ever happened to me, that rattlesnake spooking my horse. Best thing that happened to me, too." Beatrice squeezed his hand gently. "You taught me what love was, Grant. Real love, not the kind in books, but the kind that shows up every day and chooses you over and over again. You taught me what strength was, not just muscles, though you certainly had those." His eyes twinkled. "The strength to be vulnerable, to trust, to believe in good things. You taught me that, B." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Grant's breathing had grown labored in recent weeks, and Beatrice knew in her heart that their time together was drawing to a close. The knowledge hurt like a physical wound, but she did not look away from it. They had never shied away from hard truths. "I love you," Grant said softly. "I have loved you for 45 years, and I will love you beyond whatever comes next. I love you too." Beatrice lifted his hand to her lips and kissed his knuckles. "Thank you for seeing me, for loving me, for making me believe I was worth loving. Thank you for letting me." Grant smiled at her, that same smile that had transformed his face all those years ago in the boarding house. "Thank you for saying yes to that first walk, for taking a chance on a cowboy with a dislocated shoulder and more confidence than sense. Thank you for building this life with me." The stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, the same stars they had watched together for decades. Beatrice memorized this moment, the warmth of Grant's hand in hers, the sound of his breathing, the weight of him beside her. She wanted to remember it all, to carry it with her through whatever came next. Grant passed peacefully in his sleep 3 weeks later, surrounded by family, his hand clasped in Beatrice's. The funeral drew people from across the state, cowboys and ranchers and townspeople who had known Grant as a fair dealer, a skilled horseman, a good man. They offered Beatrice their condolences, their memories, their assurances that Grant had lived a good life. Beatrice accepted it all with grace, though inside she felt hollowed out, scraped raw by grief. She had known this day would come, had known that one of them would have to face life without the other, but knowing did not make it easier. Her children gathered around her, offering comfort and support. Margaret stayed at the ranch for 2 weeks, helping her mother adjust to the silence, the absence, the empty space beside her in bed. Thomas took over more of the ranch responsibilities, insisting his mother take time to grieve. James and Sarah checked on her daily, bringing food and companionship and distraction. But it was the grandchildren who ultimately saved Beatrice. They did not tiptoe around her grief or treat her like she was fragile. They simply loved her, needed her, asked for stories about their grandfather, and listened with rapt attention as she shared memory after memory of the man who had changed her life. "Grandfather always said you were the strongest person he knew," one of Thomas's boys said one afternoon. "He said you could do anything." "Your grandfather made me believe that," Beatrice replied. "He saw strength in me I did not know I had." Slowly, painfully, Beatrice learned to navigate life without Grant. She could not say she moved on because part of her heart would always belong to him, but she learned to move forward. She found purpose in the ranch, in her family, in the legacy they had built together. She lived another 12 years, active and engaged until the very end. She taught her great-grandchildren to ride, passed on her knowledge of horses to a new generation, and served as the matriarch of a family that had grown far beyond what she and Grant could have imagined in those early days. When Beatrice passed at the age of 82 in the spring of 1937, peacefully in her sleep like Grant before her, the whole state mourned. The funeral procession stretched for miles, and people came from across Arizona to pay their respects to the woman who had proven that strength and gentleness could coexist, that being different was not the same as being less. They buried her next to Grant in the cemetery where they had once walked together, where he had told her she was worth knowing better. The headstone read simply, "Beatrice Callahan, beloved wife, mother, and friend. 1855–1937. But to those who had known her, who had learned from her example, who had been touched by her kindness and impressed by her strength, she was so much more. She was the woman who had been mocked for her size but had found a man who saw her truly. She was the wife who had been loved completely by a cowboy, who made her feel small only in the best way, only when he held her close, only in moments of safety and tenderness and absolute acceptance. She was the mother who had raised confident children, the grandmother who had inspired generations, the woman who had lived fully and loved deeply, and proven that happily ever after was not just for fairy tales. Years after both Grant and Beatrice had passed, their great-great-grandchildren would gather on the porch of the old ranch house, now carefully preserved as a family landmark, and listen to stories of their legendary ancestors. They heard about the tall woman who could lift rocks and gentle wild horses, about the cowboy from Texas who had seen past appearance to soul, about a love that had lasted through decades and endured beyond death. The Rockingham Ranch continued to operate, passed down through the generations, a testament to what two people could build when they chose to see the best in each other. The horses that ran in the pastures carried the bloodlines Grant and Beatrice had so carefully cultivated. The values they had instilled in their children echoed through the family tree, shaping how each new generation approached life, love, and the importance of looking past surface differences to recognize true worth. In Vulture City, now a small but thriving town rather than the rough mining settlement it had once been, the community library bore a plaque dedicating it to Beatrice Callahan, who had donated both money and books to ensure future generations had access to education and imagination. The elementary school had a photograph in the main hallway showing Beatrice at age 70, tall and strong and smiling, surrounded by students she had taught to read. And sometimes in the evenings when the light hit just right, locals swore they could see two figures on the porch of the old Callahan house, sitting close together, hands linked, watching the sun set over the desert they had loved. Just a trick of the light, surely, but it was a comforting thought. The idea that love like theirs did not simply end, that it echoed through time, that somewhere beyond the veil they were together still. The story of Beatrice and Grant became the kind of legend that families told to remind themselves of important truths. That true strength includes gentleness. That real love sees beyond the surface. That the right person will make you feel cherished without making you feel small, will value what makes you different instead of wishing you were the same, will choose you every day not despite who you are but because of it. And for the young people in the family who struggled to fit in, who felt too different or too much or not enough, the elders would tell them about their ancestor Beatrice, who had been mocked for her size until she found a cowboy who made her feel small only when he held her close, and who had lived to build an empire of love and legacy that outlasted any cruel word ever spoken about her. That was the real ending, not the day Beatrice's heart stopped beating, but the continuation of everything she and Grant had built together. The children who carried their blood and their values. The ranch that still operated on principles of fairness and quality. The family stories that taught each new generation what love should look like. The reminder that sometimes being different is not a curse but a blessing, waiting for the right person to recognize it. And in the end, that was what Beatrice would have wanted. Not to be remembered as perfect, but to be remembered as loved. Not to be celebrated for her strength alone, but for the way she had used that strength with kindness. Not to be pitied for the mockery she had endured, but to be honored for the way she had overcome it, for the life she had built with a cowboy from Texas who had seen her truly and loved her completely from that very first day. The sun set over Arizona one more time, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson. And somewhere in the fabric of time and memory, a tall woman and a devoted man sat together on a porch, hands linked, hearts joined, proving that some love stories do not end when the physical world releases its hold. Some love stories echo into eternity, teaching each new generation that being seen, being valued, being loved exactly as you are is not just possible but worth waiting for, worth believing in, worth building a whole life around.